Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that kind introduction, and to your Royal Highnesses and Your Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen. It's tremendous to be here, and I thank you for having us here, Jim and I, to open up this second annual Abu Dhabi Media Conference, which really, I think, after just the first outing last year, proved itself as something of real consequence, gathering together a group of extraordinary people from our industry. And it's really an incredible privilege as well to be able to introduce you or have a dialogue with you this afternoon with one of the great visionaries of our time. Jim Cameron has not only crafted, as we heard, some of the most successful movies of all time, but really has shaped so much of the way that we tell and that we listen to stories. And he shaped the fortunes of our industry from time to time as well, with enduring consequences. I think Jim is someone who always believes in better and bigger things, and in his ability and his team's ability to deliver on extraordinary, extraordinary ambitions. So thank you very much, Jim, for joining us.
Well, thank you.
I think we have time for a number of questions, and I thought, what I did was earlier on, I asked a few people around some of the things that they might want to ask. So if you really dislike a question, I'm sure that's one that I got from somebody else.
Exactly. We'll keep that in mind.
But there are so many subjects and so many things that you're involved in and have been doing. I thought we should start though with storytelling and with technology. You know, to me, it's always been so remarkable how you've invested so much in the technology of storytelling and invented so much in the way movies are made. But really, the essential character and the essential heart of your stories really always comes through and is so much a part, really the central part of their success. And I guess I wanted to ask you, and I think it's a topic many people looking at it from the outside find hard to see, is that as a director, really, and as an artist, how do you keep the technology from overwhelming a story? How do you keep the technology from really overwhelming performances? And how do you make technology and storytelling work so seamlessly together?
I think you've hit on the biggest challenge of my job. And before I plunge into the answer, I'd just like to say how honored I am to be here with such an auspicious group today and to be part of this opening conversation and to be interviewed by you when, of course, it's usually the other way around. You're the one being interviewed. So.
It's much better this way.
Okay, good. But no, that dynamic balance between technology and storytelling is something that I've explored throughout my career. And what I've found is that the challenge is to stay close to the heart of the characters. And I think that my big advantage in that area is that I write my own stories. So before I've ever thought about what camera system I'm going to use or what CG effects I'm going to use, I already know the characters intimately. I know what they're feeling at every moment of the story. And so that gives me everything I need that I need to be equipped with to talk to the actors. And a big part of the director's job, probably the most important part, is talking to the actors and drawing from them their very best performances. Even in a highly technical film like Avatar, where the actors, some of them, such as Zoe Saldana, were not even seen photographically in the film. They were only seen through the CG characters that they created. But every nuance of their performance was translated into the CG characters. So I had to be there as a director to make sure that she was able to act every moment with total emotional authority. And that comes from the writing process. Now, if I can just expand on that, Avatar was an interesting project because it actually began with me thinking about it from a technological standpoint. Because I was the CEO of Digital Domain, and there are even people from Digital Domain here today, which was a startup visual effects company in the early 90s that was designed to create breakthroughs in CG character creation. So I thought, as not only the CEO, but its biggest client at the time, let me throw them a challenge of really creating a quantum leap forward in CG character development. So I wrote Avatar to do that. And the answer I got from them was, you're too early.
Can't be done.
It can't be done. Not now, maybe in a few years. So I wound up having to wait 10 years. So there the technology came first, then the storytelling.
and you put the story in the top drawer and said, we'll wait on that to move that a little bit further forward.
Yeah, exactly.
It's an extraordinary thing, actually, when you look at, and also your career as a writer. There are themes. I think I famously said that you intended to make Avatar, the ultimate guy's action movie, and it ended up as a chick flick.
Another chick flick.
Yeah, another one. And it's something that I think a lot of people discount, maybe, is just how strong the characters in your pictures are, and how enduring they are,
right,
as well, and the relationships between them.
Well, thank you.
How do you get those performances when you have actors that are never even really interacting with each other? I understand that on Avatar, for example, you had to invent whole camera systems to record every movement. Can you describe what was the inspiration to say, I know what I'll do, I'll put a mask on them with a tiny camera right there,
right,
and do it. It's an extraordinary leap of imagination to be able to do that. How did you reach that?
Well, again, working backwards from knowing that the audience has to be moved by the characters that they see on the screen. So I knew that the film would succeed or fail not based on its vast vistas of another planet or even maybe the amazing creatures that you see there, but based on this, based on the tight close-up. And so we had to be able to capture every nuance, every molecule, in a sense, of what the actors were creating. Or the film wouldn't have, its heart wouldn't have that emotional reality that I was talking about. So we came up with a completely new, at the time, proprietary way of capturing actors' facial performances. We already knew how to capture the body performance. That was actually a fairly mature science at the time we started Avatar in 2005. But there wasn't a good way of capturing the facial performance. So we came up with the idea of mounting a little tiny camera here. And the actors could relate to each other just as we are right now.
Okay.
They could essentially do everything except a kiss. That was the one thing they couldn't do because the little cameras got in the way. But they could do everything else. They could eat, they could smoke cigarettes, whatever they needed to do. And it actually made a video image of their face throughout their performance. And that was a separate stream of data along with the body capture, which was done through markers, computer-recognized markers. We put all that information together, and then the CG characters, the tall, blue, alien characters, did exactly what they did. Now, of course, it wasn't that simple. It took us 2 years to write the software, to write the code, all the various plugins and applications required to take that raw data set and turn it into a finished performance.
Now, the other, obviously, piece of technology of huge interest to all of us in the business, and I know in particular in the making of your latest pictures, is the 3D technology.
Yes.
And I think I really wanted to explore with you one thing, which was today it feels like there's a rush to get a lot of 3D out, and big new products, big new pictures are being made and written native for 3D to really do what you did, or to try, which is to make the 3D technology really a fundamental part of the storytelling and take advantage of that. How do you feel about all of the non-native 3D pictures, pictures that were shot for 2D, being rapidly converted into 3D for theatrical release? Does that devalue the medium in some way? Does it confuse customers? Yeah,
I think it definitely runs the risk of devaluing the medium. And certainly it's a raging controversy in Hollywood right now. Do we bear the extra expense up front of shooting in 3D? Because there is some extra expense, especially with visual effects. Not so much with live action production, but the visual effects are more expensive. Or do we bear that cost in post-production once we've sort of seen if the movie's worth it, in a sense?
Right.
So it's a very cautious approach, and I think that people are harming themselves through that cautious approach. I think we have a defined, very substantial uptick in the revenue stream. Ticket sales are flat or even down slightly, but gross revenues are up because we've through the 3D, we're able to charge a premium ticket price. So it's actually been a big shot in the arm, big steroid shot for the business over the last year or so. But if you're going to reap that reward, you have to pay for it, and you have to have a good business model for doing so. So I'm a big advocate of actually shooting in 3D. I also think this whole controversy is going to go away in the next couple of years, because it'll be very difficult for Hollywood producers and studios to say, oh, this is too tricky, this 3D photography, when tens of thousands of hours of broadcast programming are being generated live in 3D all the time. And because of course sports is what's going to drive 3D into the home. And as a broadcaster, you've been a pioneer personally in bringing 3D into the UK European market.
Well, we had an inspiration. We had to get ready to broadcast Avatar, so we had to figure we'd learn how to do it. It is interesting, though, in the sports business, certainly, that's been driving our investment in 3D. And one of the things we're finding, though, is that in a lot of sports, if you look at international football, for example, it's quite difficult because international football is played in stadia of varying quality.
Right.
Big stadiums, small stadiums, different quality of lighting, all over different continents. It's quite difficult to get consistent approaches, the extra camera positions, all of these things.
Right.
But we continue to work with all the bodies. You're exactly right. And I think customers will not want big events that aren't in 3D at some point in time in the future, because it's just such an exciting and immersive experience.
Well, I think 3D adds value to almost any kind of entertainment media. Sports, gaming, even drama, which people haven't quite woken up to yet. Certainly natural history, photography, certainly the movies. I think that's been clearly established. But the value added is proportional to how much the 3D camera is able to simulate you being physically there.
Yeah.
So if you were at a sporting event, you'd want the seats right at courtside, right at the side of the field, where you're right down. That's where the camera wants to be. And of course, the cameras are still fairly large, so they're creating seat kills. They're interfering with the live experience for somebody sitting right behind there. So it's to really optimize the upside value of 3D in sports. We're going to have to rethink our camera positions a little bit. And I also think we have to think clearly, and I was talking to some of the 3D guys at Sky just yesterday. Was it just yesterday? I don't know. I've been flying so much about this. And I think that to have a 2D production, multi-camera production, and a separate 3D multi-camera production, is clearly not a good business model because you're duplicating energy.
That's the way we do it now.
They need to be folded together. Yeah.
It's very hard. And it's not just the camera positions, it's also the directors and producers and the outside broadcast units. So now there's the two big trucks sitting outside every time, because they want different angles, they want different things.
But see, I anticipated this problem in designing Avatar. Avatar was designed to serve both masters, designed to serve 3D and 2D, in the same way that as filmmakers, for years we've served the two masters of the giant screen and the small screen. And now we're down to the tiny screen, as people want to have that instant accessibility on mobile devices. So we've always served the masters of different scale. Now we're serving the two masters of depth or no depth. So Avatar, there was not a separate 3D version of the film. It was exactly the same edit, exactly the same composition, and so on. So I maintain that it can be done, but clearly the problems are greater in a live production environment.
And you can make a choice in different shots, I guess, how much you want to dial up or down the interocular effects.
Exactly.
Which is what creates that immersive experience.
Right. And I think the next wave of camera systems will help solve a lot of these problems that are plaguing the pioneers in live broadcast, because the cameras will be smarter. There'll be less requirement for a human in the loop making decisions about what's good stereo and bad stereo. We'll actually be able to put software in the line coming out of the camera and coming out of the truck that basically says, that's not good stereo, make an adjustment. And it'll basically be just done with algorithms at that point.
How do you, which is extraordinary actually. You mentioned before business models, and ultimately this is all about creating something on screen that is distinctive, that can either have a premium attached to it or simply be of really good value for a family to go out and enjoy, or any individual. And I guess I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the business of movie making. I think it's fair to say that you've been an innovator in business models in movie making in a number of ways. And sometimes, as a studio that has worked with you and is proud to work with you so many times, we've been on the receiving end of that innovation, which has been an adventure for a lot of our colleagues. Exactly. But it has been, it's been an extraordinary approach that you've taken over the years, willing to really push the boat out, if you will, on how to invest on screen and what matters for customers. I mean, I think you made the first ever movie that cost over $100 million, which was Terminator 2. The first ever movie that cost over $200 million, which was Titanic. The first ever movie.
Stop now.
Can I stop? Can I say how much Avatar cost?
You'll get in trouble from your dad.
I think I will. So I think that's exactly right. But I guess there's a couple of things there, and what I wanted to understand from you, and and having worked with over the years in really pushing it out in this. How do you think the media business, and in particular the sort of content business, if you will, I hate that word content, but the sort of the storytelling business, how do you think we approach risk?
Well, I think typically what we see are patterns of risk management that actually cripple the business, and I think we see also a pattern of disruptive ideas that come in, take big risks, and succeed. Now, not all risk takers succeed, but I think all of the disruptive successes, and I think Titanic and Avatar are both good examples of that, and even to some extent Terminator 2, were all projects that took risks, that did something unusual or against the grain of common wisdom. Because the problem is that everybody drinks at the same trough of common wisdom, so they all produce more or less the same thing. And what the audience wants is something fresh. They want something they haven't seen before. It may be a social or relationship setting that they haven't seen before, or it may be something very visual like an Avatar film or Titanic. Now, Titanic took you on a journey of time and place, immersed you in that journey. We didn't have the 3D at that time, and then worked on your emotions. And I think the best films obviously do work on your emotions. But with Avatar, I was very consciously pushing back against what I saw as an avalanche of new technology that was going to cannibalize and erode the theatrical marketplace. And I'm a big screen guy, I like that big screen experience. I have since I was a little kid, and I want to preserve that. I want to make sure that maintains a kind of a status as an anchor for our business, and all of the other sources of content. And there are many, and they're proliferating, they'll enjoy their benefit of all these new platforms. But I wanted to preserve that big screen experience when it was getting nibbled away. So I said, let's do something that's so compelling you can only best enjoy it in a theater. And that's where the 3D came from. That's why I went on this 10-year odyssey of perfecting the camera systems and dealing with the theater owners, trying to get them to adopt the new systems. Because a door opened at exactly that moment, and this is thinking back 10 years now, and that door was digital cinema.
Right.
And everyone made the assumption that digital cinema was going to, in and of itself, take over and replace film, but it didn't. It took 3D as a precipitating factor, as a catalyst, to make digital cinema happen, which nobody saw coming. I mean, I sort of had a glimpse of it, that maybe that could be the case, but sometimes you even hesitate to say such things because they're so heretical.
How do you, when you said before that you think this sort of attitude to risk or attitude to risk management is crippling the industry, is that just a question of, trying to find formula that feel safe for a studio or something like that? Is it a question of the co-financing models that have emerged? Is it a question of the number of studios or the structure of how pictures are packaged? How do you think you can break through that and actually get more risk-taking in the business to actually create some of those creative breakthroughs kind of more frequently?
It's got to be about relationships. It's got to be about relationships between the business side of the business, which is the studio kind of administration, business affairs, and marketing people and so on, and the creative side of the business, the writers and the filmmakers, directors, producers, and so on. And I think a lot of the problems in Hollywood that I see historically, and I've been in this game for about 30 years now, seem to be from applying kind of Wharton School of Business principles to the film business. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, because it's a crazy, inventive, creative business. And there's a limit to how much you can create that sort of top-down administrative model and have it work. So ultimately, the people who are successful at it from the business and administrative side are the ones that create the closest relationships with so-called creative talent and understand what makes them tick and understand their own product. The studio executives who best understand how movies work in the mind of an audience member, in the mind of a fan, those are the ones that are most successful.
How do you, and I think you talked about a crazy, inventive sort of process, but also the actual production process can be that way as well.
Yes.
Particularly when you're inventing new things sort of as you go along.
Right.
Or you find that you had a vision that maybe maybe you're halfway through making something and the vision requires more investment, a new piece of technology, to go back and do something again, et cetera. Can you just talk a little bit about that process as a director and as a leader of these kind of, they're sort of, they're like a startup business from scratch. Someone described it to me recently. Every time you have to do it that way. How do you, where's the moment, let's say when a picture is going to take longer or cost more or require something you didn't anticipate, when you say, when you have to test yourself and say, is my vision right, what's happening? How do you approach that sort of a problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's a multifaceted question with many answers, but let me talk about, you mentioned sort of the team. How do you deal with that moment of crisis? Because every film, because by nature you're going into new territory, you're going into unknown territory, that's the risk. And I maintain that the greater risk is to not go into unknown territory and do the same thing people have seen before. But there will come a time, by definition, that you're going to be at that moment where something's not working the way it was meant to work. And on Avatar, I've used the metaphor that it often felt like jumping out of an airplane and actually knitting the parachute on the way down, which we successfully did. But there were moments early on when we were just standing up our new technology, our new performance capture technology, where we'd be in the middle of a production day and we would have to stop. Things just ground to a halt because the system wasn't working. And I looked around at my team, all of whom were in their mid-20s. I was sort of the old man in my mid-50s. They were in their mid-20s. It was sort of like the Apollo launches, where all the NASA guys were all young. And they'd all sit there with glum faces. I'd stop what we were doing. We'd set up a table in the middle of the capture volume, put chairs around it, and we'd sit there and we'd brainstorm what to do next, how to solve the problem so the problem didn't recur. And even to the extent that we had to make up names for things that had never been named. And I looked around at these glum faces and I said, guys, this is the good part. This is why we're here. This is how we know we're pioneering. People will go to school on this and they'll be able to look up in a manual how to do what we're thinking of right now. And you know that in Silicon Valley in recent years, those same conversations were taking place.
Exactly.
And to be 30 years into a career and have that moment just felt like a great gift to me.
It's exhilarating, actually,
Yeah,
it must be. And for that team as well, to see how that gets worked through on an industrial scale.
Right, because you don't lay blame. You want to encourage people to bring answers, bring solutions. I'm not making the film myself. I'm only going to be as good as the team around me, which ultimately became, I think, 800 people doing the visual effects. Some of them I never even met. They were working in New Zealand. But my core team, which was about 20 or 30 people, I had to inspire them over a 4.5-year period to bring their best game every single day.
I'd like to pick up on that pioneering and exploring question in a moment, but there's just one more question on this, which is just how does the relationship work when you're in a situation like that, and a picture is they're all challenging to make, and you're solving new things on the fly. How does the relationship between the director and the producer work? How important is that, the sort of shop manager producer role as you actually have to keep that train sort of on the tracks and going forward? And how does that, you've worked with, you have a close producer you've worked with for many years, John Landau, but also in the past others as well. How does that dynamic function to actually make sure that that team can keep focusing on getting things done while the whole operation and everybody waiting for it or wondering if it's going to work, et cetera, stays together?
Well, again, you're only as good as your team. In that particular case, we're Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. We're kind of, two halves of a whole. And interestingly, it's kind of a spectrum of relationships because, John and I work together to solve the problems very proximally. And then it's John's responsibility to also manage expectation at the studio as well, who are funding this whole enterprise. So he's working on kind of two axes. He's managing expectations up the chain. He's working with me to solve problems and administrate. And I have to have my producing hat on as well, which is why I always, I take a credit as a producer on my films, and I believe I think like a producer. I think like a producer right up until the moment I walk onto a set and I have to make a scene happen. At that point, I'm a director.
And then there's somebody backing you up on the production side.
And John better be there to back me up.
Exactly. If we could shift gears a little bit, Jim, and just you mentioned just before the going into unknown territory, and you mentioned pioneering, and I know you've been I want to talk about a different kind of exploration for a moment. You've been an explorer yourself. You've explored the oceans, you've explored the planet, you've been to some of the deepest trenches of the oceans. I think you're building a new submarine.
We're going even
to go
deeper,
to the Mariana Trench.
Yep, correct.
Which we'll come back to. One of the things that you've been a key, a real champion of is conservation, and telling the story about the environment and about conservation, or about the oceans, and the climate and whatnot. When you look at the business of exploring, if you will, the practice of exploring, where do you see that today? And I'll tell you the reason why. I live in London, and we have the Royal Geographic Society in London, which has done exploring around the world for hundreds of years, and is now at a place where they're questioning the value of exploration. And they're saying, can we really afford to do this anymore? Is this something that's really worthwhile? I'm sure you're familiar with the debates that have been going on in geographic societies around the place. At the National Geographic Society, which we're very proud to be partners with the National Geographic Channel, it's quite the opposite, I think.
Oh, they're very bullish. Very bullish.
Let's go. Let's keep going. There's so much more to find. Where do you see sort of exploration and discovery in the world today? As someone who's done so much of it yourself and pushed for so much to be done, how do you see that problem getting solved, to be able to make sure that we're out there, and also to make sure that we're communicating about the planet and about the world in the best way possible? Well,
media plays a huge part in it, because now, previously exploration used to be funded by the sort of the gentlemen explorers societies. Now you've got National Geographic is a perfect example of one of those societies that became its own sort of network and media empire publishing entity. And so they actually, in a sense, through their shows and programs, do fund some exploration. It used to be all funded entirely scientifically. And now that's not possible, unfortunately, because all the science dollars are going to pharmaceuticals and that sort of thing. And money is going to ocean exploration if it's surveying for oil and so on. But actual exploration for its own sake is really getting short shrift these days, other than in the field of space, obviously. So the oceans are a great unknown frontier. There's so many, we've only explored visually about 5% of them. And, so I've dedicated the greater majority of my time between Titanic and Avatar was spent on 6 deep ocean exploration expeditions, where I was actually in the submersible myself. We were operating robots from the submersibles. We were going to, deep hydrothermal vents and so on. We'd pay for it through making a film, a 3D film, but we were actually able to fund science. We brought investigators with us, which is sort of turnabout from the normal paradigm, where the documentary crew kind of tags along with the scientists. And I'm proud to say that we were actually pushing the boundaries of science with a media project, and we'll do the same thing when we go to the Mariana Trench and to some of the other deep trenches.
And when will that be?
Well, about a year from now.
How deep is that for the layperson in
It's 11,000 meters,
11,000 meters.
Yeah.
And can you get to the bottom?
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Well, getting to the bottom's the easy part. Getting back to the surface is the hard part. People have been going to the bottom of the ocean for thousands of years. They didn't mean to.
It's extraordinary. I think this partnership between sort of media, enterprise, storytelling, et cetera, and science and exploration and discovery is one that's really exciting. It's one of the reasons that we all get excited at News Corporation about our partnership with the National Geographic Society. But I think it's going to take quite a lot to make it really make a difference. For example, people passionate like yourselves who can be inventive enough to come up with those crazy projects that nobody else thought were going to be possible, going and doing the 6 dives, et cetera. Are you seeing more of that? Are people just kind of responding to the call?
Look, I think that if you can sit people down in front of a well-crafted program, it does inspire that innate passion in us to explore. Because I think exploration is in our DNA. I just think that especially the younger generation is less interested in exploration than I certainly was at that same age. So I think that this is a place where media can really help. But of course, most media is market-driven. So how do you create a market or a desire that's not there? Again, it's about storytelling. It's about people. I think you have to share the passion of the people that are doing the exploration. But there may be another thing, too, that people should think about. You look at the devastation in Japan right now and the devastation in Sumatra a few years ago in Indonesia. This is something that's happening in a poorly understood geological process down at the bottom of these deepest ocean trenches. Because the deepest spots in the ocean are caused by one continental plate or tectonic plate pushing underneath another one and making this deep thing. And when it slips and moves, displaces a lot of water, sends out a big tsunami, and hundreds of thousands of people can be killed. We need more data from these deep trenches. And we need to go down there and look, and we need to do sonar and ground penetrating sonar and seismic surveying and that sort of thing. It's not being done because we need warning systems. We need to understand the processes better. So here's a place where actual human safety is related to what we learn as explorers and as scientists.
No, it's a very good point. And actually, the appetite, I think, for learning more about it is, and for seeing, themes around the environment, around conservation, I would argue is growing. And I think, every time...
Conservation, definitely. Yes, absolutely.
I think every time we put out, if we talk to our customers about the planet, if we talk about energy saving, if we do other things like that, we actually see a pretty good business there. And I think, I've heard you talk about, with Avatar itself, the deep emotion around some of the larger themes about exploitation and conservation in that.
Well, if you think about it, we were worried going into Avatar that the environmental themes, that went almost to a kind of spiritual level, to a very deep level in that film, would actually hurt the film. It was kind of, I think one of, somebody at Fox who shall remain unnamed, not there now, said, is there any way to reduce this new age tree-hugging hippie crap? And so there was definitely a concern, I think, on everyone's part that if we weren't delivering, entertainment first and the thematic message second, we were going to get burned. We were going to spend a lot of money and have a flop. What I think we found was actually quite the opposite, that the film succeeded at such a high level. You can't say it was succeeding in spite of itself. It had to have been succeeding because all of the elements of it were all essentially sort of firing on all 8 cylinders, if you will. So I interpret from that, and to a global audience, not just sort of in this market, but not that market. It was pretty uniform around the world. So I interpret from that there is a change in the zeitgeist happening right now, that people are sort of waking up to our human responsibility to the natural world and our necessity. Maybe even if you don't feel a connectedness to nature, our necessity to take care of nature for our own sake and for our children's sake. I think not everyone is waking up to it, but I think there's this slow kind of awakening on a planetary scale. And that's a good thing, because we need that. We desperately need it right now at this point in history.
I think that's right, and I just hope that we can continue to tell those stories and continue to find those audiences and grow that audience to engage in some of the biggest issues of the day.
Yeah, and I think media plays a huge role in that, and I think media hasn't served those issues well in a general sense, because if you think about, let's say, the issue of climate change, you'll see a scientist who believes that we're doing it and a scientist who doesn't. And that creates a nice controversy, a nice debate on a show. The scientist who doesn't agree is in the 1% minority. So to actually show that correctly, you'd have to have a stage with 19, with 9 or 19 scientists on one side who are saying, take this seriously, and the one who dissents. But it's never done that way, So the media actually couches the story in certain terms that induce doubt.
It's exactly right, and it's one of the biggest challenges, I think, and you have to, in the news business, is how do you balance the idea of trying to be reflective of a lot of different views and trying to tell stories from different angles, with this risk of creating equivalency where there isn't equivalency.
Exactly.
And it's very, very hard, because also if you look at something like a producer trying to book somebody to go talk on a TV show, they also don't necessarily have the time or the knowledge to say, okay, this person who comes from the Center for New Environmental Progress, right?
Right.
And go down the chain of where they are, et cetera, and they're fully paid up. Sort of big oil
fossil fuel
lobbyists,
funded.
Right? So it's,
right.
So it's quite a difficult dynamic for them on the ground to get that right.
Yep.
I liken it sometimes to, if you got diagnosed with cancer by the first doctor, and then you got a second opinion, and then you got a third opinion, would you go to the 99th opinion and find someone to say, don't worry about it, and say, I'll go with that guy?
Well, yeah.
I don't think you would.
I mean, really, we're in a situation where, the so-called Cheney 1% doctrine was enough to be very concerned, enough to take control foreign policy in the U.S. And we're talking about the 99% doctrine here being ignored. It's almost like a mirror image. So I think that's the equivalency issue, I think, is a problem, because the debate should really be, what are we going to do about it, and how do we cooperate globally? Yep, and this is where I think social media can be very helpful, and I think the fact that we have an unprecedented level of international cooperation as a result of media right now, I think these are the hopeful signs.
I think there are hopeful signs, and I think, I think communications between people is probably the best promise that we have.
Yes,
like you say, social media, and a generation that's growing up with a different set of expectations around what can be done from the standpoint of efficiency, effectiveness, conservation, security, and so on.
Yes, exactly.
We only have a few more minutes, and I'm conscious of time. We should probably get back to the movie business at some point.
Okay.
I'm curious, and I know everyone will be curious to understand sort of how you look at the creative trajectory that you've sort of set in motion, really. I mean, frankly, as a pioneer in computer-generated storytelling, computer-enhanced storytelling, sometimes with sleight of hand, sometimes with dramatic technological advances. You mentioned before, you used the word immersion, and you said that these cameras, the good ones will be ones that really put you right in the action, et cetera.
Yeah.
Where do you see that trajectory kind of moving towards? Is that something that's going to be complete? Will we have things, what will we have as entertainments as you look forward just a little ways in Avatar 2, which we hope is on track, as well as new projects that you're taking on?
Well, I got asked after Avatar came out, what do you see as the next big thing? Is there going to be 4D? I said, well, first of all, we need to consolidate 3D, and that's going to take 5 years to a decade. We're in a transition space right now that's roughly equivalent to between when the color movies came out and the time when all movies had to be in color. So we're in that kind of transition now, and I could fairly safely predict that we're going to see a lot more 3D. The question is, how pervasive will it be? Will it be right down to the way you watch your news, the way you watch everything on a tablet or a laptop, and so on? And I think there are very good arguments for that taking place. It's really a question of how long, and how innovative the broadcast culture becomes about incorporating that, and the business modeling for it.
And I think maybe one of the interesting things as well is you see oftentimes if you look at the advances in the ability to deliver huge bandwidth products to customers, right?
Yes.
At scale, the ability to process lots and lots of data.
Yes.
So a lot of on the go processing we see in massively multiplayer games, et cetera, and things like that.
Yep.
And these immersive 3D experiences, you can imagine an environment where you have entertainment that is indistinguishable from reality.
We will get there.
We will get there.
We will get there, yeah. And we're well down that path right now. I mean, when gamers can spend 8 or 12 hours immersed in a game, it becomes their reality at that point. It's not distinguishable. It's become their reality. And I think that when you start layering stereoscopic 3D in with gaming, people's minds will literally just go through that screen. And the reason that I say that 3D is such a profound change, because it can manifest itself on every platform at every level, from little screens to big screens. And if you think about what our society has become, we interface with our reality, and now our social reality as well, through screens, much less so interpersonally from previous generations. So if you can somehow change our basic contract with screens, whether it's entertainment screens, business screens, whatever it is, then you're doing something that's going to have a ripple effect across all platforms and all media. And that's what I think 3D can be.
And it will bring really profound changes with respect to social interaction as well, perhaps that we're not necessarily ready for.
Well, here's an interesting little tidbit of data that I got just recently talking to some brain researchers. And they were studying babies. And they actually put them in these big scanning devices and analyzed their brain patterns while they were in social interactions. And they found out an interesting thing. I hope this doesn't take too long, but they would study the baby's mental activity when the baby was seeing a social scenario, usually involving the mother. So it would be the mother and someone else. The baby would become very interested in the other person because the mother was interested in that person. So it was a triangulated experience, and they were deriving data from that social scenario. When they videoed the social scenario, put it on a screen, put it right at the same distance so that it filled the baby's same field of view, it was ignored completely. The baby knew the difference, that it was symbolic information, not real information. Now, if you can start to break down that barrier, which I believe 3D does, then, and I don't have the data yet, we don't have the neuroscience to support this, but it's my theory that you start to move toward getting away from symbolic information to a real sense of being physically participatory. And that's why I think part of Avatar's success, you felt the emotion because you felt you were there, felt you were involved.
I think it's right. If the one piece of evidence that I have that you're right is I took my son to his first 3D movie when he was 5 years old.
Right.
And it was a natural history, it was at the Natural History Museum, and it was a dinosaur thing or something. I think it was sea monsters or something like that.
Right.
And it all looked very nice, and we saw that we were in the dark in the theater, and we saw the fish going by and this and that. And then the sea monster's long neck came straight out into the audience.
Right.
And my son, who's this big, just hopped down, got in the aisle, and ran straight out of the room.
Good.
So
Good.
I think your theory is correct.
Yeah.
Now, I also think that we're probably out of time. We should leave it there. But I would like to say, Jim, just
where it says overtime down
Yes.
there in big red letters?
Exactly, yes. Yes. I would just like to, again, thank you so much for being here. And I really, I know that everyone here has just enjoyed listening to your insights, taken a lot away from it. I know I certainly have. And it's just tremendous to have you here and tremendous to have you share your thoughts. So thank you, Jim.
Well, thanks, James. Thanks so much. It was great. Great conversation.